What the hell? Okay. Watchmen is now fully streaming on HBO and any services that you may have that have connections to HBO. The first season is now fully done. Episode 9 just premiered about an hour ago. And now that I've got all my thoughts collected, I can talk to you guys a little more in detail about it. This takes place 34 years after the graphic novel's events in 2019. Instead of New York, however, it takes place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, the law enforcement is working directly with vigilantes to catch criminals and to catch what is known as the cavalry, a more evolved form of the Ku Klux Klan, which is now using Rorschach's journal from the original graphic novel as sort of like a Mein Kampf version. And they're following the teachings of that almost to a T, and they're wearing the masks with the Rorschach blots on them. And several vigilantes are now hunting them because they've apparently made a comeback of sorts, headed by Sister Night, played by Regina King. And more and more things begin to get entangled, and a murder takes place in the state. Things become even more complicated as there seems to be more forces involved in it than just a racist white supremacist cavalry. That's about as much as I'm gonna say, really, because I don't really want to go into too much detail about what's going on with this entire season. There is a lot to unpack. If you've seen my Twitter, if you've been following my posts by each episode, which I don't know who is, but if you are, then you have seen I've discussed some extensive details about certain episodes. But if you haven't, like I said, I know a lot of people are still playing catch up. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about it right now. Watchmen's graphic novel is one of my favorite literature pieces ever. It's my favorite graphic novel of all time. This is a cliched statement. Most people will tell you that it's their favorite graphic novel ever. It's a perfectly written piece of literature. But in all honesty, very few things come as close to Watchmen's quality as that one. I guess V for Vendetta and The Dark Knight Returns are honestly the closest competition it has. Watchmen is a very complex and layered story, and it takes a while for you to really understand what the story is. This whole thing, the whole graphic novel, builds to something eventual that is pretty massive. And as you've read the graphic novel, you may know that it ends with the giant squid over New York, the 3 million lives lost, and that's about where it ends. Adrian Veidt causes that. In this show, he's played by Jeremy Irons, and he's up to something over here too. But the fact of the matter remains that, well, that's how the graphic novel ended. So the idea of having a sequel already is a terrifying thought. There is Doomsday Clock, which is taking place in the 90s though, so this is taking place beyond that. I don't know if this is considering Doomsday Clock into its canon. This is just a direct sequel to the original graphic novel, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about here. How, without further ado, how is the show? This show is phenomenal. It's a really fantastic season of television. I absolutely love this. It's not a perfect season. It's got a couple of issues. I, however, have been enthralled by everything that I've seen so far. I think certain episodes, particularly episode 6 and episode 8, are among the best of 2019. When it comes to writing and direction and even creation of shows, Damon Lindelof is synonymous. He's created some of the biggest shows of all time, most notably Lost. And he is someone who is to be revered. Yes, sometimes he doesn't stick the landing when it comes to the ending, but I mean, it's the journey that matters, It's like the friends we made along the way that really is what's the mental process going into these things. With Watchmen, he's created a very different world. It's not necessarily the same world as it was before. Like I said, that time they were dealing with the fact that vigilantes were being pushed out. And then there was this entire scheme in the process about the comedian dying and then Rorschach investigating it. That was what the graphic novel was dealing with. In 2019, things have changed though. Vigilantes are now working exclusively with the police department. And those who were former vigilantes, like Laurie Jizpike, played by Jean Smart in this, she is now a vigilante hunter. She's doing as she is as Lori, and she's hung up her Silk Spectre identity, which is what happened at the end of the graphic novel. I'm going into too much of the comic lore here, but the show is intricately made. But much like the graphic novel, it takes a very long time for you to get a proper sense of the plot. It builds a lot. There's a lot of setups and there's a lot of scenes that happen which seem a little out of context. In fact, for the longest time, Adrian Veidt's motivation seems like a gigantic question mark that you never know if the season will ever answer. It's only in the last episode and a half of the season that you really start to get every answer hit you at once. And you have to remember back to previous episodes and certain, maybe parts of episode 1 even, to realize, oh, that makes sense. Now this makes sense. And so there is a lot of patience required because of it. It's not as simple as we're taking down some racists and that's our show. Regina King is wonderful in this. Her performance is very heartbreaking at times. Her character is not one that has gone through an easy time. Angela Abar has seen a lot of shit, and the show rightfully showcases that. Her life has not been the most smooth. She has a husband played by Yahya Abdul Mateen II, who is interesting character. Not gonna go into him too much because that's a plot thing I can't really talk about. And she has 3 children. And she's trying to manage this life as being Sister Knight and all the other vigilantes in place, particularly Looking Glass, played by Tim Blake Nelson, who is phenomenal as well. He's having a pretty great year. In Just Mercy, he did an amazing job, and now over here, he's done an amazing job as well. Let's talk about Jean Smart as Laurie Blake. My top. This is a brilliant performance. If you had to imagine an older version of Laurie from the comic book and think, oh, what would she be like if she reached her mom's age, which is in the graphic novel, and would she be as cynical or would she be as as reflective as things? And instead, she's a vigilante hunter. There's a poser in episode 3 when she first shows up, and she just kills him. And I was like, Jesus Christ, like, damn. And I didn't even know it was her at first. It was only later when someone's like, Agent Blake, and I was like, oh my God, Blake, it's Laurie. Last but not least, though, Jeremy Irons as Ozymandias. Another terrific performance. Ozymandias has always been a very vague character. Don't expect the show to give you a lot more answers after a while. It does give you gives you a little more insight into his life after a while, but he's always been a bizarre one. He's always got like crazy schemes up in the back of his hand, and once again, that's the case over here, even in this show. The production value especially needs to be discussed. What an amazingly detailed show. And it traverses so many great historical points and has a lot of great social commentary to offer as well. Yes, a lot of it has to do with racism and the way black people are treated and how they have been treated. For example, a certain major character who later becomes very integral to the story, and is from the beginning actually, his backstory is explored, and that is in episode 6. That is one of the best episodes of a season I've ever seen. It's a devastating episode. It's a very brutal episode, but it is magnificently directed and written. That might be the best episode of the entire season. It honestly it's a competition between that and episode 8, which I can't even talk about episode 8 because that's just a major spoiler all around. But I don't know, I can hint at it. It's like it's also a backstory of someone else, but it's just a really layered thing. These are the kind of things I really liked about Watchmen as a graphic novel. And I like the fact that these have carried forward into the show running and the storytelling of this entire thing. It traverses years. It talks about things that have happened before. It brings in things from the graphic novel perfectly. Vietnam was a big part of the storytelling in the graphic novel, along with Dr. Manhattan being there. This is a part of the show too, because Angela was in Vietnam for a while, so you get that too. But also along with that, like I said, I can't stress enough the commentary of this. Every single scene, major scene, has racial commentary, social commentary, political commentary, and it's wonderfully handled. It also actually answers a few things from the graphic novel that seemed vague, which was something I was fascinated by. There are some certain plot points in particular, particularly the ending of the graphic novel, that is very interestingly explored in this one, and they give it a whole new spin And it makes you ask certain questions, and it makes you rethink certain things of the graphic novel, which I thought was an utterly fascinating thing. One thing in particular with the original Minutemen in the graphic novel is seriously switched around in this one, and it makes you look at the Minutemen, original Minutemen with Hooded Justice and the original Silk Spectre and the Comedian in a whole different way. These are the things I really love about this show, the world building, and they've done the honoring to the source material really well. No spoilers, but Dr. Manhattan, they handled him pretty well. I will say this. They handled him as well as I think they possibly could. Um, yeah, I think some things are going to be controversial for a few people. There's one decision in particular they make with Manhattan, which is going to maybe receive some backlash, especially if you're one of the comic book purists watching this for a while, though. I don't know. Let's see how it turns out, though. I'm interested to see what the commentary is. Yeah, my main negative is basically the villains, the whole motivation, the cavalry, and there is something else. I just thought that these were not very well developed at times. There was some interesting setup to these things, and there was some interesting background information that they give you on all of this and what they're doing with it, and there's the commentary that goes along with it. Sometimes that commentary gets a little on the nose, but in each the villains' cases, I didn't really find myself as invested in it as I possibly could have. I wanted to be as invested in it. I was very invested in Ozymandias' his entire arc in the original graphic novel. I wish I was that invested during this our arc in the entire season, and I was to an extent. But after a while, it started to get a little more disconnected by the minute, and I just think that this was the weakest aspect of the entire show. And a lot of things build to that. So certain things just feel like they could have been a lot better, and they come off as a bit as if they couldn't be as good. And I don't know, the impact of certain things was lost because of it. And in this desperate way to tie up all the loose ends in the ending, while the finale is really good, yeah, those arcs, I just think they could have been a little bit better. All that being said, Watchmen Season 1 is still a phenomenal season of television. It is a worthy sequel to the graphic novel. Fans should be very pleased with it. If you're not, I get it, honestly. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there are people upset with it, but I personally think it's a fantastic way of continuing the story. And if they make a season 2, which they haven't announced yet, we'll see. But honestly, if they ended it right here, it'd be a pretty good place to end things. I'm going to give Watchmen Season 1 an A-. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Look forward to reviews of Star Wars and Cats this week. That's it. We're at the tail end of 2019. This has been a very fun year. Thank you very much. And it's been a blast with you guys. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the movies. Oh, but 1 minute. I'm sorry about the ticking clock in the background. I had too much fun with that in the audio suite, so I figured I'd just keep it over the entire review. Okay, that's it.